A South African has found herself at the center of protest in the United States, where she has organized and led peaceful demonstrations in Arlington, in Virginia area near Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. 28-year-old Yolande, Kwinana, originally from Port Elizabeth and in Johannesburg, has lived in the U.S. for 4 years and works as an IT consultant, but took it upon herself to plan a protest, engaging with local law enforcement to ensure the peace while demonstrating for justice for the lives of minorities at the hands of police in the United States. She spoke to the SABC correspondent, Shoan Bricepiece.
Yolande, Kwinana, thank you for speaking with us and welcome to SABC News.
Thank you, Shoan.
So, take us back, right? What's the backstory here? You end up playing this leading role in organizing and leading protests in the aftermath of George Floyd's horrific killing in Minneapolis. How does a South African get to the middle of a protest in Arlington, Virginia?
Well, I think it definitely came from a place of tiredness. This has been going on for some time, and I always tell people when they ask me, how does it feel being in America as a Black person, that immediately when I came here, I could feel kind of racism from all angles, which is completely different from being in South Africa. I was a person. I'm just a person, like I'm a human being. But here you're specifically Black. And in every interaction that I have, if I go to the grocery store, if I go to work, if I'm just walking outside on the street, on the trails, you definitely know that you're Black because of the kinds of interactions that you're having with different people and the way that they treat you. So I definitely think this came out of just tiredness, that it can't be 2020 and we're still fighting for the right to just live, to just breathe, to just be on the streets, to just drive our cars. That can't be happening in 2020 in the most powerful nation in the world, right? Something has to change. Not even some of the poorest countries are having this kind of problem. So I think it came out of a place of that. And then when I looked out, into Arlington, what was happening, because originally I wanted to join a protest, and it just was not a protest that was happening within my area. And I wanted it to be peaceful for sure, without having any connection of looting to myself or anything like that. So, and that was the situation in DC. So I decided I'm going to just start my own. And it was amazing the kind of response that I got. Over 200 people came to the protest, which was amazing for a place like Arlington.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, next question, right? That's over to me. Now, I wanted to, there's video of you talking to people and telling them, like, to speak up if you see something. If you see something wrong, say something. If a guy gets arrested, ask some questions. What's your messaging been in the protests that you've led?
Exactly that, right? So one thing that we all know, that we all know in any movement, is that the people who have the power need to be the biggest allies, need to be the biggest voices in times like this. So I've been getting a lot of questions from white people, basically white community, asking, what can we do right now? How can we help? Knowing that they are in a upper hand position. So basically spreading the message that, if you're seeing a person being arrested, if you have the capability to go ask them, because I know if I go and ask a policeman, why is this man being arrested, I'm going to be put in jail just like him. But if you're a white person and you have the capability to voice that in the moment, why is this person being arrested? Record that in the moment, what is happening? Do so, right? Everything that can be done at this point must be done. So if you see something that you're able to achieve in that moment, however small it is, do it.
Someone who saw your video told me, wow, she's really brave. Do you feel really brave?
No, not really. I feel exceptionally anxious. One thing that people don't know about me is I have social anxiety. So it was a lot for me to even do that. But again, I said,
So you are brave.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
If you have a lot of anxiety and you're leading a protest and telling people, hey, you need to speak up, that sounds like a brave person to me.
Or a tired one.
And exhausted, fatigue, right? It's exhausting, I'm sure. Let me ask you this. You know, you talk about wanting really to have a message at these protests, wanting them to be peaceful. That really has been an emphasis and your core. What do you make of some of the imagery we're seeing on the streets of the United States? Overnight in New York, there was looting at Macy's and shop windows on Fifth Avenue were destroyed. You've seen iterations of this in Atlanta. The CNN building was defaced in Houston, in Los Angeles, in Chicago. What do you make of all of this that's going on right now?
So I think there's two parts to all the destruction that's happening in certain areas. The one side of it is that we have seen videos of kind of alt-righters trying to deface the name of this movement, you know? So trying to really destroy the movement by putting more emphasis on the destruction. And you're seeing the peaceful protesters kind of come back as, you know, this is not us. We're not doing this. People are trying to take attention away from us. But then I think there's also the part that there are some protesters who go there with the intention of being peaceful, and then it ends up turning into something destructive, just out of all the energy and the adrenaline that's happening in the moment, and the anger, and the police kind of pouring tear gas on people. It's a lot. It's a lot to be in a protest at that time, especially in the evenings. It can get intense. But to be honest, I think that, as I said earlier, everything that can be done should be done, but I do not condone destruction happening towards absolutely anyone, right? Obviously,
that dilutes the message, right? This is still about injustice against Black people in this country, particularly in the aftermath of George Floyd, who died at the hands of police in a vicious death. That's the focus here, right?
Exactly. So we need to try to remember that is the focus at all times. And it is not just George Floyd, right? So it's Breonna Taylor, it's Ahmaud Arbery, it's Eric Garner, it's Sandra Bland. There's a long list of names that have been caught on video, and this is happening. Right. So, you know, we just need to remember that the only goal is that Black people have to stop dying at the hands of police.
So let's talk about political leadership at this moment. What is it that you are seeking from the political leaders? Because that's why there are protests on the streets, is so that there can be change, and change tends to happen from the bottom up, but also from the top down. What do you make of President Donald Trump's leadership in this moment?
So there's been a lot of negative rhetoric that has come from Donald Trump that has been very hurtful to the African-American community as a whole, that has really aggregated his supporters to attack and be violent towards the community. So I really think in a lot of ways he's completely agitating the situation and creating a lot of violence instead of unity right now.
Yeah, he's not bringing the temperature down. He's kind of pouring fuel on the fire. That's what someone says. Is that an analogy you agree with?
Definitely. And I think there's very little about him speaking to, you know, what has happened to George Floyd and what he'll do. He's very vocal about things that he will accomplish. But in this case, there's been no action items of this is what I'm going to do because this has happened.
Yolande, you know, we talk about what needs to happen so that today or tomorrow is better than today. Mm-hmm. A lot of people tell me that it's about justice. The one arrest of the one police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck, that's not enough. The other three officers that were in that situation, in that circumstance, also need to face charges, and justice has to be served. Is that kind of at the core of what needs to happen now?
One of the things for sure. I'd say that's one of the main things, because there's absolutely, that speaks to a culture that a whole group of police officers can watch this happen and none of them say anything. So that speaks to a culture of a department, a culture of policing in America. So definitely if you and I went and murdered someone, but I was the one who pulled the trigger, you'd also be charged, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the same thing. It's the same concept. They definitely need to be charged. But in addition to that, there needs to be more oversight on policing in America. It's become a situation where they can do whatever they want, when they want, without any oversight or recourse. And that needs to stop.
You know, South Africans have a history of racial segregation. I mean, we have come from a very harsh legacy of apartheid, and we have our own concerns in South Africa. But it's still very difficult for people looking at, this beacon on the hill when you talk about a democracy in the world, right? That seems to be sort of fraying at the edges. Is that a fair description of what's going on in America? Are we fraying? Is American society fraying a bit?
There's a big difference between, I think, democracy in America versus democracy in South Africa, right? So South Africa is very much a rainbow nation. So is America in a lot of ways. But when we talk about democracy, it's definitely democracy for a certain group of people. If you think about how many Black people vote in America, very, very, very few. Because to them, no matter whether a Democrat or Republican is in power, life is still bad for them regardless, right? So I don't think that there's anything that is kind of deteriorating in any form. I think it's just something that's always been there. Since Black Americans arrived in this country, it's always been a consistent fight for democracy, for their rights, for their lives, right? Slavery, civil rights, and now this. So it definitely hasn't changed. It's just become more amplified and more visualized to the whole world that this is actually the reality in America.
Because more people have a video camera on their phones these days, and I think
social media has played a huge role in that.